Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, it's Monday morning. That means it's time to crown another King of the Week. Helping me this week and joining me now, Kasey Kazliner. How you doing, Kasey?
Doing great. Glad to be back on the show, Jesse. Appreciate you.
Now, Kasey, for those of you who don't know, is a young man who attends USC University. He contributes to the Talk of Troy newsletter website, yeah, podcast. We do, multimedia, a little bit of everything. The Skate of Thrones podcast about the LA Kings. Casey's doing yeoman's work trying to get more young college-age students to get into Kings hockey. You and I were just sort of chit-chatting before I hit the record button. So we're recording this at 10:15 p.m. on Sunday, following the Kings' second 7-2 victory of the weekend. And I tried to sort of pick beforehand, and I would, had a little note to myself, well, okay, if anybody has an impressive night tonight, I'll try and factor that in. But I already had my 3 picks set aside, and then they scored 7 goals tonight. So, we'll start out with you. We'll start with the honorable mention. Who you got for the honorable mention? Loads of people to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, definitely appreciate you having me on, especially this week, because it's a challenge when you have.
Yeah, well, when I asked you, I didn't know they were going to score 14 goals in 2 days.
Yeah, because I remember the last time you had me on, it was like the complete opposite, where it was like I had to choose Gavrikov as my 2, I think. nothing against the guy, but it wasn't like an offensive.
No, it's rare that a defenseman gets King of the Week points.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely. So I have my 3. Definitely a tough week. I had to scramble things after this game. So my honorable mention is Joel Edmondson, and I was kind of between him and Jeannot, because I was like, the fourth line's really taking off right now. Jeannot had 2 goals this week. You don't see a lot of that from him. He's only playing 10.5 minutes a game too this past week. But Edmondson, I mean, he led the team with a +7 rating. Yep. And I feel like you have to choose a defenseman in a week where the Kings only allow 6 goals across 4 games. I mean, we know they're a great defensive team, but when you're playing, a team like Carolina, it's won 8 straight heading into this game, into the last game when the 2 teams played, and then only allow 2 goals like they did. And I mean, the goaltending's been great as well, but when you have David Riddick in goal, it's kind of a wild card. So I have Edmondson there. He had an empty net goal against Chicago. That wasn't really factored into my decision. But 2 assists last night against Boston. And I know the hockey stat card people really gave him a good rating there, and that helped me for sure. I mean, he had 10 block shots this week. He just looked really good on both ends of the ice. So
he is one of those players, and we've talked a lot about it recently, where you look at the reaction when he came in and signed the contract. And I have to confess, when he signed that contract and he was brought in, I definitely had a bit of a I don't know, that's kind of rough. And then when then you just read and read and read. And I was sort of like, yeah, okay, I'm not sure that that's the guy they need, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then, you look at it and it's however many games into the season and he's +25, and I'm not entirely positive that that's up to date. And you just go all right, I don't know. He looks pretty good to me. He's playing more minutes, or at least earlier in the season, he was playing more minutes than Kopitar and Kopitar and Kempe, and not costing them games. They're in second place in the division. And yeah, he's +25 with 19 points. Guy's having a great season. It just is what it is. As much as you'd want to fight it or complain about it, I'm just not sure there's anything to say. So I'm glad that you picked a defenseman, and a defenseman that didn't necessarily rack up a lot of points this week, because although he did have 3 points, I guess that's more than nothing. I'm going to go ahead and go with Jordan Spence, who only had 2 points and was only quote unquote a +1. But in those 4 games, he was the only player, if I'm not mistaken, to be on the ice for 0 goals against in all 4 games. So in 64 minutes and 25 seconds of ice time for Jordan Spence, no goals against while he was on the ice. And, you talked about the importance of defense. And how many goals did you say they allowed this week? 6 or no? 6 in 4 games. Well, none of them were when Jordan Spence was on the ice, and he was the only guy to do that. And for a player who I think has gotten a lot of criticism for not living up to, his progression prior to the season, and for a guy who's fighting for ice time with Brant Clark and et cetera, and, with Gavrikov taking Doughty's spot and all the changes to the blue line, he's settled into a role and he's playing it. And that assist he had on Kuzmenko's goal, where he lobbed it down the ice, knowing that Kempe was going to beat the icing call. That's a play, the Kings have scored on before. That's a play that we know is a set play. We know it's something that the back defenseman who makes that lob has to look for. So one of his 2 points on the 4-game week. So Jordan Spence is my honorable mention. Your runner-up then, Kasey.
Yeah, I like the pick a lot. And I think, to your point too, I mean, for what it's worth, no penalty minutes for him either. So, and I
there you go. I didn't even catch that, but yeah, good call.
Yeah, the Kings PK this week, I think I calculated it they stopped 7 of 10 power plays, and it's a little bit under the average. So especially in a game like that Minnesota game where you give up 2, it's very important at this point in the season. So my runner up, again, it was a hard decision, and I went with Andrei Kuzmenko.
Okay.
I felt like, he was very due for some sort of mention like this. It felt like, before he, got this scoring started, obviously 3 points now in his last 2 games, 2 goals. He was, making that first line look a lot more lively. You could tell he was due. And I think, it takes time to develop chemistry. I mean, Jim Hiller talked about a couple games ago in the press conference about him just kind of needing to ease in, being close to that point. He had 2 goals, 1 assist this week. Like we said, a +3 rating. It felt like he was due, and he's doing it efficiently. I mean, he only averaged this week, these past 4 games, 14 and a half minutes of time on ice. That's the 5th lowest on the team. I mean, that's kind of around the range of like the Genots on the team and some other guys. Like, he's being efficient, and he's just kind of feels on brand with what the Kings are preaching. And that's sort of like from their forwards, being cerebral, being scrappy. They're not a team that scores a lot of goals, but I think having a guy like Kuzmenko to round out the 4 lines, I mean, that's been talked about so much ever since they acquired him. And they've lost, 1 game since acquiring him to Minnesota, a game they probably should have won too. I think, he's done a lot for this team that goes unnoticed, and I think he's finally cashing in. We've seen him do it these past 2 games now. So Kuzmenko is my runner-up.
I'm glad you picked him because I'm picking him too. And my rule of thumb is always, if a guy scores his first goal as a King or first goal of his career or whatever, he gets an honorable mention. Then he scored again in the Boston game, and I really didn't feel like honorable mention was good enough. But I think King of the Week is too good. But yeah, both goals really impressive. And the goal against Boston, it wasn't the game winner, but it was the insurance goal that really salted the game away. I was talking to Jonathan Davis about the game after the game, and he was talking about Boston and how Boston's no good. And he said, once it was 3-2, Boston doesn't have any pushback. And I hope I'm not putting negative things about Boston into John's mouth, and I said, yeah, that's fine and dandy. But at 3-2, because there was a pretty wide window between Doughty's goal and Kuzmenko's goal as far as timeliness, and the Kings don't score a lot. So at 3-2, listen, I get it. Boston's not Boston, and they only had 1 shot on goal in the 3rd period, and so they're not very good. But at 3-2, a bounce can go the wrong way. You saw both of Boston's previous goals. Just Kings not paying attention, and Boston broke in and, scored both of them sort of undefended from right in front of Kemper. So stuff happens, and who knows, right? It could have been 3-3, and it's a totally different game at that point. But Kuzmenko scored that goal, and it was well placed, and it was well timed, and it made it 4-2. And at that point, pretty close to the end of the period now. You heard the telecast talking about you just need to hold on at this point. Go into the second intermission 4-2. So good timing, good shot. Was it 3 points on the weekend for Kuzma, or for the week? I guess I should say, yeah, 3 points, 2 goals and an assist, +3, 5 shots on goal. Yeah, I mean, honorable mention wasn't good enough. King of the week is a little too good. But yeah, definitely a strong runner up, and he definitely brings a different element to the team. And this is just me being an old Kings fan who can remember a lot of prior trade deadline acquisitions. There have been a lot of them over the years, and a lot of them didn't work out. And I was beginning to get a little bit nervous when he hadn't had so much as a point. I was beginning to get a little bit like, well, is this going to turn into another one of those moves where they bring a guy in and it just doesn't do nothing for nobody? 3 points in 2 games is pretty good. He seems to be on a run. It's calmed me down. So he's my runner up. Your king of the week then, Kasey.
Yeah, definitely another hard pick. And I think to your point too, I mean, I honestly was a little bit the opposite because I felt like, as long as they're winning, I mean, it would be great for Kuzmenko to tally points, but like they're winning games. I mean, they obviously, lost to Minnesota. That was the one loss, but you had a few ugly wins in there, like the Predators game, but you beat Washington. Like, I don't know. I was still feeling like, maybe he's the glue guy that they need up top, but then now he's patched in. So my king of the week, I mean, definitely hard. Like you said, I was prepping for this a little bit before the game against Boston. And, there's 5 Kings this week with 4 points, and that was the most. But one of them, Adrian Kempe, was my pick. I felt like he just stood out from the rest because he set the tone early in those wins, right? He scored the opening goals against Minnesota. I know they lose that game, but he still sets the tone. And they're a team that needs to set the tone when they don't usually play well in the second period. He scored against Chicago early. And then in Boston with that beautiful assist to Kopitar to open up the game for neutral ice, streaking Kopitar. And that's a line that, kind of like we talked about, with Kuzmenko, sort of needs that burst of energy sometimes, especially with Kopitar and, being on the older side now. And I think, like I said, like given how poorly they play in the second period, you need a guy to open things up early and unleash a little bit of momentum into the offense, especially, on a line too that's still adjusting like we talked about. And Kempe, he had 2 goals this week, 2 assists. He was +1, and just as a facilitator and a goal scorer playing a 200-foot game. I mean, I saw that out of him this week. Saw that out of him all season, and he's my king of the week. Definitely hard choice.
Yeah, and listen, when I told you that I might choose my picks after you made your picks in an effort to spread the points around, I'm not gonna, because I also have Adrian Kempe, and for the exact same reasons that you listed. Scoring the first goal in those games, even though they lost the Minnesota game, he did his job. For a team that doesn't score a lot, I think it is important to score first and to score early. His assists to Kuzmenko and to Kopitar in this game, fantastic. 4 points on the week. And, I don't think it's a coincidence that Kuzmenko is starting to find a groove with Kempe providing the assists. This is no knock against Kopitar, but I think if Kuzmenko is going to succeed, it's going to be because of Kempe finding, chemistry with him. And then, we'll get what we can from Kopitar, as we saw in that goal tonight to make it 1-1. He's still obviously perfectly capable of doing it. But yeah, Adrian Kempe, I mean, he is the Kings' best player. I know a lot of people have talked about Quentin Byfield, and we can have a conversation. I do want to have a conversation about Byfield and Fiala and Jeannot, frankly, who also had 4 points this week, and Doughty too, for a lot of players with 4 points. But yeah, I think, like I said, for all the reasons that you laid out, and I am also going with Adrian Kempe. So ironic, I suppose, that we both have a defenseman as our honorable mentions, but 2 top liners for the runner-up and the King of the Week. But that's what it is. So congratulations, Adrian Kempe, this week's King of the Week. As I said, I do want to talk with you. We don't have to talk about all of them, but I want to start out with Byfield and Fiala, because I have said recently on Kings Talk, when Byfield got his 17th goal, it was the 6th game in a row that he had scored. And so everyone was saying like, oh, 6 games in a row. This is Byfield's team now. Byfield's arrived, yada, yada, yada. And I am thrilled about Quentin Byfield. I have been a Quentin Byfield supporter. I have argued for why I think his learning curve will prove that he will go on to be a great player. But at 6 games in a row, to only have 17 goals means that before that 6-game scoring streak started, he had 11. And that wasn't good enough for who everybody wants him to be, for who he's now being paid to be. And it just wasn't good enough. So now he's got 19, and I don't say this because I feel like I'm not going to get it. I say it because I feel like I am going to get it. I want more from him over the last stretch of games. I want him to go into the playoffs red hot. I want him to continue to be a point producer, even if he and Fiala are getting, I don't want to say garbage time goals, but they're getting the 5th, 6th, 7th goals of these blowouts, and it's fine as long as they are putting up points. And he's also scoring overtime game winners. I mean, I don't want to completely detract from where he's getting his points, but I, there were people saying like, oh, it's his team now, and it's like, no, it's not yet. First of all, I don't think that's how hockey works in the first place, but even if it were, let's see him get up to 25 goals by the end of the season.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think, I mean, I listened to your episode last week with DB, and I definitely agreed a lot. With the sentiment too, that like, we've seen this from Quentin a lot. We saw last year, he was making the, comeback player of the year bids early on in the year, these flashy goals, like goal against Columbus, it still played. And then he sort of disappeared. And
for like 20 games. I mean, it was a long time.
Yeah. And I think, I inclined to agree. And I was looking through his game log earlier, and I think the thing that stands out to me is he's had really good performances against Vegas, against Edmonton. So on one hand, he's had a lot of these kind of empty games where he's, no goals, no assists. He's gone stretches of that. But I don't know. I think I definitely agree, but I also think, well, if he's playing good against Edmonton and that's your first opponent, or if it's Vegas, that's all that really matters. I mean, you can worry about round 2 or round 3 when it comes around. And at that point, maybe he's just, that'll be his first, if they win the first round, that'll be his first round, ever won, his team's first in a long time. But I definitely agree. And I think, a lot of that is contingent on, the team as a whole. Cause I think it's hard to praise one guy on this team. I mean, we had a hard time praising a king of the week because it feels like this team is very kind of bipolar in the sense that, individuals thrive when the team thrives. I mean, we saw that month of January, Byfield had 0 goals. He had 11 assists, but he had 0 goals. And the team as a whole, like the point I'm trying to make is him playing good is, I think, like very reflective of the team playing well. And that doesn't discredit, what Byfield has been able to achieve, especially, the past few weeks and months. But I think at the same time, you can't necessarily give him the torch yet when this team is still so reliant on Darcy Kemper, on, the defenseman, heck, even on David Riddick on, a few nights per week. And so I think until I see, not just, to your point, not just Byfield scoring, like you said, like, an onslaught of goals down the stretch, but, like we're seeing right now, the all 4 lines clicking. Because I think we've seen Hiller move the lines around as well. And it might not be every single game for 60 minutes or 20 rather, that Byfield has, Kevin Fiala to deal with, So I think that's sort of what I think on it.
I just have flashbacks to last year in the playoffs when you had Kevin Fiala on a line with Trevor Lewis and Blake Lizotte. And I don't even remember who Pierre-Luc Dubois was on a line with. It was the 4th line. And you're like, this is 2 guys that you're looking to for offense. And they're not playing with players that are going to facilitate a lot of offense. So now you're desperately trying to win a 1-0 game or a 2-1 game. And I think we all know that against Edmonton, that's infinitely more difficult than against any other opponent. So the fact that Byfield and Fiala are clicking together is great. And I don't mean to say it like, oh, that's great. Oh, so great. It is great. It's legitimately great. when they reach the playoffs, I agree with you. I think the team success leads to individual success and vice versa. In a series like they're likely to get against the Edmonton Oilers, where matchups are going to be huge, and you have guys like McDavid and Draisaitl, you need to have every one of your options comfortable, firing on all cylinders and ready to go. I don't know that they lost. Well, I don't think they lost last season because Byfield hadn't scored more than a goal in 20 games. But if he is, somebody tweeted out a brilliant tweet / stat that I retweeted, which was a tale of two seasons. First 49 games for Quentin Byfield, 11 goals and 23 points. Last 20 games, 8 goals and 21 points. Okay, great. Keep that going, right? Like hit the playoffs on that kind of streak. Get Fiala and, keep Fiala playing as well as he is. And then now going into that first round matchup against whoever it is. Okay. Now you've got 3 different lines with 3 different identities. If Kuzmenko keeps producing and they build chemistry and the fourth line keeps building, okay, now you've got a totally different team with a completely different identity. All 4 lines know who they are. They do different things. You can match them up however you like. It just becomes a completely different equation. And that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. I mean, my question for you too is like, you can look at Byfield, you can look at his confidence. That's been talked a lot about, in the press conferences, but also just his teammates, like, Fiala being coined the Byfield whisperer and whatnot.
It's funny, I've heard it as the reverse, but either way.
Yeah, I've heard it both now that you bring it up. Do you think it's more of because at this point in his career, like, sure, you can point to confidence, but he's also been in the league for a few years now. Like, this is not a new thing for him. Do you think it's a line thing, his success recently and what could continue? Or do you think it's more of like, okay, wow, Quentin Byfield's really locking in. He's really, kind of, the chemistry is really there on that third line, or he's really found his place. He's not moving around. Like, which one do you kind of think it is?
I think the Kings develop players with a very specific model and style. And I think it requires a very specific personality type and, I just think it requires a certain type of person to mesh with that style. And I think whether by luck or by design, they drafted Quentin Byfield at the right spot. Second overall, and I say the right spot because second overall pick brings with it a lot of expectations. But you can go back and look at his development and see, I don't think it works this way for most players, and I'm not sure that most players would even be patient enough for it to work this way. But you can go back and look and see, okay, first they added this, then they added that, then they had him play with Kopitar and Kempe and had him do board battles and be a sort of third whale, and learn how to be a responsible defensive, player on a top line against top line opponents. Now they moved him back to center and he's playing with a artiste like Kevin Fiala, who, Kevin Fiala has traditionally done well with more lunch pail type players. And I think because they sort of forced Byfield to master the lunch pail style of game, that has made him, even though he has artiste tendencies within himself, right? You see these goals that he's scoring and he still can do that goal against Columbus. Like, we're going to keep talking about that for the rest of his career. I actually didn't know human beings' bodies could do that many moves in one short period of time. But I think in his heart of hearts, he has bought in and believes in the system that the Kings want him to play. And I think that makes him an ideal line mate for Kevin Fiala because he can be whatever Fiala needs him to be in any given moment. Whether it's lunch pail, board battler, taking up space, drawing extra defenders, or if Fiala needs just a guy who's moving fast. I mean, like the goal that he scored tonight, or for those listening, last night against Boston, I didn't think Fiala or Laferriere deserved assists on that goal. And it's one of my pet peeves that the league automatically gives out 2 assists and no more, no less. Well, sometimes less, but that if 2 guys clearly touch the puck, then both guys get these. Like Laferriere passed the puck over to Fiala, and he kind of flubbed the pass, or Boston got a stick on it. I'm not sure it was necessarily his fault, but either way, Laferriere's pass yes, it progressed the puck up the ice and through the neutral zone, but it wasn't like it really led to Byfield's goal. And then Fiala's pass, well, Fiala just hit Byfield, and then Byfield hit the zone with speed, and he shot it, right? Like, that was an unassisted goal as far as I'm concerned. But Fiala saw him. He was moving, and Fiala had faith and trust in him, right? Fiala didn't feel the need to try and do something himself. He was comfortable moving the puck up the ice to Quentin Byfield. And then Quentin Byfield has become the player who can apparently shoot from that distance whenever he wants and put it past the goalie. It was a great goal. So I just think that line now, you look at it and you go, okay, well, if Fiala and Byfield are whispering to each other, then the sky's the limit for what they can accomplish.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think too, like, having a guy like LaFerriere on that line to sort of, he's still young and kind of learning how to be, like he's meshing into that role too, because we saw him earlier in the year being, such a great goal scorer, consistent. And then now it's feeling like, a bit more of a facilitator. And so I think for him to sort of to mesh into that role is huge. And then, to your point as well, I feel like Fiala kind of, I don't know if that he necessarily became more of a selfless player, but I think, we've heard in the press conferences, him and Jim Hiller and sort of bouncing off each other a lot, kind of trying to find that right, not, I wouldn't say role, because I don't know if his role has necessarily changed, but that right sort of mentality for Fiala to ease in a little bit better. And I think, I think so much of what, and I've talked about this on my show as well, like, the recent success with the Kings hasn't just been the addition of Kuzmenko. It's been seriously just, it's really like being at the right place at the right time, but also having that sort of mentality of, what they have right now of being a little bit more selfless, of being, kind of more cerebral on certain plays, finding the slot. And I think we're seeing that a lot more with Fiala and the team as a whole, but I think Fiala in particular, because he's cashed in a lot more than other guys.
I thought he was awful in the first part of the season.
Yeah.
I mean, awful is probably too strong a word, but I was very down on the play of Kevin Fiala in the early parts of the season. He's been great lately. And I really do think that the line combination, staying together and learning to play with each other, is great. Let's really briefly talk about Drew Doughty's 4-point week, because he played less than 20 minutes last night. And I think I saw somewhere today that he played just barely over 20 minutes tonight. I'll try and quickly look it up while we're talking. But if Drew Doughty can play well and the Kings can win, and he's not playing 27 minutes a night, I think that's a huge benefit. Not that I think he's hurts the team or anything when he's playing tons of minutes, but tonight he played 20 minutes and 19 seconds. So I think that's 2 nights in a row where he played basically 40 minutes combined.
Yeah, and he averaged these past 4 games this week that we're talking about 22 minutes and 8 seconds.
Yeah.
So nothing crazy.
No, but that just goes to show that, that's probably more about Jim Hiller, because you're right. Over the 4 games, Doughty played 22 minutes and 8 seconds. Gavrikov played 21 minutes, 2 seconds. Anderson played 20 minutes, 51. And Edmondson played 19:39. And those were your 4 leading minute getters. And Clark and Spence, well, I guess Spence didn't play that many. Where is Spence? There he is, 16-12. Clark played 17-20. So, it just shows you that Hiller is finding ways to balance those minutes. And we've heard for 5 years now that it's time to reduce Kopitar and Doughty's minutes. And I don't know, it looks like it's finally happening, and they continue to win. And so hooray. But 4 points out of Drew Doughty. That's great.
Yeah.
That's all I got about that. I just wanted to point it out because he got 4 points. And Jeannot with 4 points, Jeannot's probably never going to be the 23 goal scorer or whatever he was that one year. But 7 goals, 13 points. No complaints, right?
it was also +3 this week. I think to your point, like, if you can get something out of that fourth line, not that it's not a talented line, because it certainly has, Turcotte, of course, he's still growing. And I think, the Trevor Lewis conversation is a whole other can of worms when he's on that line.
I'm so disinterested in that conversation.
I don't blame you. It's kind of a broken record at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Sammy Hellenius as well. I mean, I think that line, you talked about personality on the lines. I think that line in and of itself has a ton of personality. Sammy is such a physical, like, brute force up the middle. Jeannot, can, find that scoring touch we saw this week. And then, of course, Turcotte as well can facilitate and score. So I think, the personality within that line has been huge these past few weeks. And I think they needed that.
Yeah. And it is nice to see them gaining chemistry. There was I want to say the goal that Jeannot scored against Carolina was from off to the side, assisted by Turcotte. And I thought I saw them try almost the same identical play against Boston. It didn't work, but Jeannot did wind up scoring later. And Hellenius, listen, I am partial to Hellenius mainly because I don't think I've ever been around someone as tall as him. But also because when they drafted him, they made a very specific point of drafting him for a very specific role. And it's always nice. I don't know why. It just tickles part of my brain when a guy is drafted and the rhetoric is immediately, that's what this guy is for. We have an idea of who he is. And then a couple of years later, because he's still a kid. Like, everyone says, oh, Byfield's 22. And you're like, okay, but lots of guys by the time they're 22, or not lots of guys, but lots of superstars by the time they're 22 are already superstars. Hellenius, I want to say, might have just turned 20 or maybe 21. I can't be sure off the top of my head, but you look at him and you go, yeah, okay, he's young. I guess he turned 21 in November. So he'll be 20. Oh, no, it says 22. Is he 22 already? Oh, anyway.
Wow.
He was drafted in the 2021 NHL entry draft. And he was taken for this role. He didn't start the season on the roster. I'm rambling. I apologize. But he was a second round pick, 59th overall, and they picked him to be a bottom six player. And when he was called up the first time this season, I think I asked Jim Fox and I just said, listen, if he plays well, does he ever go back down? Now, he did briefly, but he's back up and it looks like he's here to stay now. And if he plays well, if the fourth line plays well, if they show out in the playoffs, he's on the team to start next season. And that's, Sammy Hellenius, NHL player. So, and it's so great to have a player like Jeannot on that line to give that line identity, veteran presence, stability, whatever you want to call it. So there you go. The Kings are a wagon. At least this week they were.
No, I mean, they haven't shown me any reason to believe they can't beat anybody in this league. And I think, that home record reflects that. And I think this week coming up, I mean, you have Colorado on the road, that's certainly a test. And I think, as long as they can play serviceably, on the road, I mean, I think that's sort of the conversation now of especially like how close this Pacific is. I believe they're tied in points with Edmonton's technically ahead of them. Yeah.
I mean, I think they're absolutely capable of winning a playoff round. I'm less confident in their ability to win 2 playoff rounds just because it's difficult. I'm less confident in their ability to win 3. And I'm not even going to entertain notions of them winning the cup this year. Although, listen, it would be fantastic. I would love to look back and be laughing at myself for saying that. But I mean, I don't think that's what we're looking at. But I had a conversation with somebody, a very large Kings fan with a very large footprint. And we were talking about this team and we were talking about why fans are mad about which different things. And the conversation of whether or not the Kings had been building something came up. And the reality is, I don't think that this team was necessarily built in a way where, like, 4 years ago, you could look at the blueprint and say, okay, well, obviously they were doing this and they planned on doing that. And then they planned on doing that. And then 4 years later, we've reached this stage of the plan. Like, no, I don't believe that. I don't think that the Gavrikov trade was something you could foresee. I don't think the Fiala trade was something you could foresee. And obviously the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade went belly up and was, wound back a year later. But for a team that is, partially planned and partially improvised, pretty good. Like I said, I have all the faith in the world that they go in a playoff round, and now we just have to watch them go do it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, because I think like there's certain teams in sports in general that have that sort of, like the Golden State Warriors, right? Like no one touts them as title contenders anymore, really. I mean, you could argue that, but it's like when you have a guy like Steph Curry, anything is possible. And that's how I feel like with the Kings having that DNA of Kopitar and Dowd. Like, not that those guys are necessarily like your reliable point getters every night. Although like this week they were. I think, that's sort of where the championship question comes in, because it's like, well, okay, the Kings on paper and maybe this season haven't proven to be the best team in the league, but they have that experience. They have, like if any team could do it, it would be the Kings, and because of the history. But I'm inclined to believe that history in sports doesn't matter really at all.
No.
When it comes, I love seeing stats of like, this team's 3-1 all time against this team. And it's like, okay, well, 2 of those games were in the 70s.
Yes.
Like, yeah. But however, I think the one thing I will say to sort of contradict that is when you carry over guys that can sort of preach, the past woes and the past success, that's where I think it sort of does come into play a little bit. And I think, to your point, so like how it relates is I don't think they've been really building much, especially when you go into this year and there are a lot of question marks, especially with the signings they made over the offseason. But I think, if a team can cultivate that, it's one that's won, 2 cups in the last,
Sure. I guess when I'm talking about building, I'm looking at 2 different. So like Tampa or Colorado, those were teams where you look at it and you go, okay, maybe things went wrong. Maybe they had to improvise here or there, but you can see the sort of like draft this guy, draft that guy, acquire young talent, hoard young talent builds, and then maybe you add pieces at the end there. Florida is just a mishmash of pieces that came together. Barkov and Ekblad are the only guys they have drafted on that roster. Everybody else is trades or free agency. And so you just go, okay, well, you couldn't have planned that. There's just too many like you can't plan for Matthew Tkachuk demanding a trade out of Calgary, and you can't plan for your Huberdeau and Weegar contracts to be the only ones that, you know what I mean? You can't plan that. Stuff like that just happens, and good for you to capitalize on those moments. But I just feel like the Kings are put together much more like Florida than like a Tampa or a Colorado. Now, hopefully the end result is the same. But as somebody who watched a team be built, and even when I say that, I don't even believe it, because Dean Lombardi got lucky on a lot of improvised moves. Carter and Richards, you couldn't predict that those guys wanted out of Philly and that they both had cap circumventing deals, but he made moves. So the Kings team that won in 12 and 14 was sort of a hybrid of planning and improvisation. This team, to me, feels a lot more improvisation than planning. They don't have a lot of draft picks. Clark and Byfield are kind of the only 2 big names left over. I guess Turcotte as well, but Turcotte's not playing a premier role. I mean, neither is Clark, really, but I suppose the potential's there. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here, Kasey, but I appreciate you joining me. Again, Skate of Thrones, Talk of Troy. If you want to follow Kasey, I think he's a real strong voice in the community, and I'm thrilled that young people care about hockey and that you're trying to talk to them. So thanks again, Kasey.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Appreciate it.